The telegram arrived on a Tuesday morning in August 1882, and Garrett McKenna knew before he opened it that everything was about to change forever. He stood on the porch of his sprawling ranch house outside of Abilene, Texas, staring at the thin paper in his weathered hands while the morning sun beat down mercilessly on the dry earth. His younger brother was dead. Consumption had taken him quickly, the telegram said, and now his widow and daughter were alone in St. Louis with no family and no money. Garrett read the words 3 times before the full weight of them settled into his bones. Thomas had been his only sibling, the cheerful one who had chosen city life over ranching, who had fallen in love with a seamstress named Mary and built a different kind of life. Now Thomas was gone, and Garrett was all the family they had left. He sent his reply within the hour, telling Mary to pack what she could carry and come to Texas. He would take care of them. It was what family did, even though he had not seen his brother's wife more than twice and had never met his niece at all. 3 weeks later, Garrett stood at the train station in Abilene, scanning the crowd of disembarking passengers for a woman and child he would barely recognize. The platform smelled of coal smoke and dust, and the late afternoon heat made everything shimmer. Then he saw her, a slender woman in black mourning clothes with dark hair tucked beneath a simple bonnet, one hand clutching a worn carpet bag, and the other holding tight to a little girl of perhaps 5 years old. Mary's face was pale and drawn with grief, her eyes red-rimmed but dry as she searched the crowd with visible anxiety. Garrett removed his hat and approached them carefully, not wanting to startle her. "Mary," he said quietly, "it's Garrett." Recognition flickered across her tired features, followed by something that looked like relief mixed with apprehension. "Garrett, thank you for coming. This is Sarah." She gently urged her daughter forward. The little girl had Thomas's eyes, bright and curious despite the circumstances. She looked up at Garrett with the kind of fearless assessment only children possessed. "Are you my uncle?" she asked. "I am," Garrett confirmed, crouching down to her level. "Your papa was my brother and I loved him very much. I am sorry for your loss." Sarah nodded solemnly, processing this with the gravity of a child who had learned too young what death meant. "Mama says we are going to live on a ranch now. Will there be horses?" "More horses than you can count," Garrett assured her, then straightened to meet Mary's eyes. "Let me take your bags. The wagon is just outside." The ride back to the ranch took nearly an hour, and Mary spent most of it in silence, staring out at the vast Texas landscape with an expression Garrett could not quite read. Sarah asked 1,000 questions about everything she saw, from cattle to tumbleweeds, her childish enthusiasm providing a welcome buffer against the awkwardness between the two adults. When they finally arrived at the ranch, Mary drew in a sharp breath. The house was large and well-built, 2 stories of solid timber with a wraparound porch and real glass windows. The land stretched out in every direction, dotted with cattle and bordered by sturdy fencing. Several outbuildings clustered nearby, including a barn, a bunkhouse, and various sheds. "It's beautiful," Mary said quietly, and Garrett heard the surprise in her voice. "Thomas used to say I was married to this place," Garrett replied as he helped them down from the wagon. "I suppose he was not wrong. I have built it up over the past 12 years since I was 21. It is a good life, if a hard one." He showed them inside, where the house revealed itself to be comfortably furnished if decidedly masculine in its sensibilities. There were no curtains on the windows, no decorative touches, nothing soft or refined. It was the home of a man who lived alone and focused all his energy on working the land. "I have prepared 2 rooms upstairs for you," Garrett said, leading them up the wooden staircase. "They adjoin each other, so Sarah will be right next to you. I hope they will suit." The rooms were clean and spacious, with good beds and sturdy furniture. Mary set down her bag and turned to face Garrett, her composure finally cracking. "I do not know how to thank you," she said, her voice trembling. "I had nowhere else to go. Thomas's debts consumed everything, and I could not keep our rooms. I was terrified of what would happen to Sarah if I could not provide for her." "You are family," Garrett said simply. "You will always have a place here for as long as you need it." Mary nodded, pressing her fingers to her eyes to hold back tears. Sarah tugged at her mother's skirt, clearly anxious at seeing her upset. "Why do not you both rest?" Garrett suggested. "I will prepare something for supper. We can talk more tonight." Over the next few weeks, the household settled into an awkward but functional routine. Mary proved to be a woman of remarkable resilience. Despite her grief, she immediately began making herself useful, cooking and cleaning and bringing order to the bachelor chaos of Garrett's home. She hung curtains, planted a small garden, and transformed the Stark house into something that felt more like a real home. Garrett found himself grateful for her presence in ways he had not anticipated, though he was careful to maintain a respectful distance. She was his brother's widow, still deep in mourning, and he would not presume anything beyond offering her sanctuary. Sarah adapted to ranch life with the enthusiasm of childhood, following Garrett around whenever he allowed it, petting the horses and collecting chicken eggs, and asking endless questions about everything. He found himself charmed by her despite his natural reticence, and he took time each evening to teach her small things about the land and the animals. But as summer turned to autumn, Garrett became increasingly aware of a problem he had not fully considered. He was running the ranch with only 2 permanent hands, old Charlie, who had been with him for 8 years, and a younger man named Pete, who had worked there for 3. It was not enough. He needed to hire more men to prepare for the winter work, to handle the growing herd, to manage the 100 tasks that kept a ranch of this size running. But the thought of bringing strangers onto the property now, with Mary and Sarah living there, filled him with a cold anxiety he could not shake. He had heard the stories, seen the evidence himself in town. Women were vulnerable in this raw country, especially women without male protection. Ranch hands were often rough men, drifters who moved from job to job, and while many were honest and hardworking, some were not. The thought of exposing Mary to potential danger, of allowing someone onto his land who might threaten her safety or make her feel uncomfortable, was intolerable, so he delayed. He worked longer hours, pushed himself and Charlie and Pete harder, and ignored the fact that they were falling behind on necessary work. Charlie noticed, of course. The old cowboy had been around too long to miss much. "You are going to work yourself into the ground, boss," Charlie said one October morning as they repaired fence line in the north pasture. "And me and Pete along with you. You know we need more hands." "I know," Garrett muttered, hammering in a post with more force than necessary. "So why have not you hired anyone? We got men coming by near every week looking for work." Garrett did not answer immediately, focusing on stretching wire between posts. Finally, he said, "Things are different now. I have to be more careful." Charlie studied him for a long moment, then understanding dawned in his weathered face. "You are worried about Mary." "She is under my protection," Garrett said quietly. "I will not bring someone onto this land who might be a threat to her or Sarah." "That is noble thinking," Charlie acknowledged. "But you cannot run this place on caution alone. Winter is coming. We got to move cattle, repair the barn roof, lay in supplies. We need help." Garrett knew Charlie was right, but the knowledge did not make the situation any easier. That evening, as he sat at the dinner table with Mary and Sarah, he found himself wrestling with the problem again. Mary had made pot roast with vegetables from her garden, and the house smelled wonderful. Sarah chattered about a butterfly she had seen, and Mary listened with patient attention, occasionally glancing at Garrett with an expression he could not quite interpret. After Sarah had been put to bed, Mary returned to the kitchen where Garrett sat with a cup of coffee, staring at nothing. She poured herself a cup and sat down across from him, her movements quiet and graceful. "You have been troubled lately," she said. It was not a question. Garrett considered deflecting, then decided she deserved honesty. "I need to hire more ranch hands," he admitted. "The work is more than Charlie and Pete and I can handle alone, but I find myself reluctant to bring strangers onto the property." Mary's brow furrowed. "Because of us. Because of me and Sarah." "I would not have you feel unsafe in your own home," Garrett said, meeting her eyes, "or uncomfortable. You have been through enough without having to worry about rough men making trouble." Something flickered across Mary's face, an emotion Garrett could not name. "That is very considerate," she said softly, "but you cannot sacrifice the ranch for our sake. This is your livelihood. Your safety matters more." The words hung in the air between them, weighted with meaning neither of them was quite ready to examine. Mary looked down at her coffee cup, a faint flush coloring her pale cheeks. "What if I helped?" she asked quietly. "Helped how?" "What if you let me meet the men who apply for work? I could tell you if any of them made me uncomfortable, if I felt unsafe around them. Then you could make your decision based on that." Garrett sat back, considering this. "You would be willing to do that?" "I think it is the only practical solution," Mary said. "You need workers, and I understand your concerns, but I am not so fragile that I cannot assess a man's character. I have lived in cities, Garrett. I know how to read people, how to sense danger. Let me help you with this." It was, Garrett realized, a good solution. More than that, it felt right. "Very well," he agreed. "We will do it together. Any man who wants work here will need to meet with both of us, and you will have veto power. If you feel at all uncertain about someone, I will not hire them." Mary smiled, the first genuine smile he had seen from her since she arrived. "Thank you for trusting me with this." "It is your home too," Garrett said. "You should have a say in who is allowed on the property." Word spread quickly that the McKenna ranch was hiring, and by the end of the week, men began showing up looking for work. Garrett had them wait in the yard while he fetched Mary, and together they interviewed each applicant. The first was a grizzled man in his 50s who reeked of whiskey and could barely meet Mary's eyes. She shook her head almost immediately, and Garrett sent him on his way. The second was younger, perhaps 25, with a cocky swagger and a way of looking at Mary that made Garrett's jaw tighten. Before he could say anything, Mary spoke up. "Thank you for your interest, but we are looking for someone with more experience." The man argued, his tone turning aggressive, and Garrett stepped between him and Mary with a hand on his gun belt. The message was clear, and the man left quickly. The third applicant was different. His name was Daniel Hartley, and he was a lean man of about 30, with sun-weathered skin and calloused hands that spoke of hard work. He removed his hat when Mary came out, greeting her with respectful courtesy, and answered Garrett's questions about his experience with straightforward honesty. He had worked ranches in Kansas and Oklahoma, knew cattle and horses, and was looking for steady work after drifting for too long. "Why did you leave your last position?" Garrett asked. "The ranch was sold," Daniel replied. "New owner brought in his own crew." "I got good references if you want to send telegrams." Mary observed him carefully, then asked, "Do you drink, Mr. Hartley?" Daniel met her eyes squarely. "I enjoy a beer on occasion, ma'am, but I do not drink to excess and never when I am working. I have seen what liquor does to men, and I have no taste for that life." "Do you have family?" Mary continued. "A sister in Ohio," Daniel said. "I send her money when I can. Our parents passed some years back. Mary glanced at Garrett and gave a small nod. Relief washed through him. You are hired, Garrett said. Room and board in the bunkhouse, $30 a month. Work starts at dawn. Daniel's face lit up with genuine gratitude. Thank you, sir. Ma'am, I promise you will not regret this. Over the following weeks, they hired 3 more men using the same method. Mary sat in on every interview, asking her own questions, gauging each man's character and intentions. Garrett came to value her judgment enormously. She had an instinct for people that complemented his own assessments, and together, they assembled a crew of workers who were not only competent, but also respectful and trustworthy. The new hands quickly learned that Mary's presence on the ranch was not to be taken lightly. Garrett made it clear from the start that any disrespect toward her or Sarah would result in immediate dismissal, and the men seemed to understand and accept this without issue. Daniel, in particular, proved to be an excellent worker and a steadying influence on the others. He was quiet and reliable, always respectful to Mary when their paths crossed, and good with Sarah on the few occasions she wandered near the bunkhouse. As winter approached, the ranch ran smoothly with the full crew. Garrett found himself working alongside his men more than he had in years, no longer frantically trying to cover too much ground alone. And in the evenings, he returned to a house that felt warm and welcoming, where Mary had dinner ready and Sarah greeted him with stories of her day. He tried not to think too much about how much he looked forward to those evenings, or how his eyes sought out Mary throughout the day, watching her hang laundry or work in her garden. She was still in mourning, still grieving his brother, and he had no right to feel what he was beginning to feel. But feelings, he was discovering, did not care much about rights or propriety. One cold November evening, after Sarah had gone to bed, Garrett and Mary sat by the fireplace in companionable silence. She was mending one of his shirts, her needle moving with practiced efficiency, and he was reviewing the ranch accounts. The domesticity of it struck him suddenly. How natural this felt, how right. You have been very kind to us, Mary said suddenly, breaking the silence. Kinder than we had any right to expect. You are family, Garrett said, not looking up from his ledger. No, it is more than that. Mary set down her mending and looked at him directly. You have made us feel safe, Garrett. After Thomas died, I was terrified. I did not know how I would protect Sarah, how I would keep us fed and sheltered. But you have given us more than a home. You have given us peace. Garrett finally met her eyes, seeing the sincerity there and something deeper he was afraid to name. You have given me something too, he said quietly. This house was empty before you came. I did not realize how empty until it was not anymore. Color rose in Mary's cheeks, and she looked away, clearly flustered. I should finish this mending, she murmured, picking up the shirt again. They did not speak of it again that night, but something had shifted between them, an acknowledgement of feelings that could not be ignored forever. December brought the first real cold snap, and with it, problems. Several head of cattle went missing from the North Range, and Garrett found evidence of rustlers. It was not uncommon in this part of Texas, but it was dangerous nonetheless. He increased patrols and had the men check the herds more frequently, but the thefts continued. Then one morning, Pete came racing back to the ranch house at full gallop, his horse lathered and his face pale. Boss, we got trouble, he gasped as Garrett emerged from the barn. Found Daniel on the North Ridge. He has been shot. Garrett's blood ran cold. How bad? Bad enough. We got him in the wagon, bringing him in now. Garrett shouted for Charlie to ride for the doctor in town, then ran to meet the wagon as it lumbered into the yard. Daniel lay in the back, his shirt soaked with blood, his face gray with pain. Garrett and Pete carefully carried him into the house, where Mary had already cleared the kitchen table, her face set with determination. "Put him here," she directed, and they laid Daniel down as gently as they could. Sarah peeked around the doorway, her eyes wide, and Mary quickly sent her upstairs. "Stay in your room, sweetheart, and do not come down until I call you." Then Mary rolled up her sleeves and began examining the wound. "The bullet went through his shoulder," she said, her voice steady despite the blood. "He is bleeding badly, but I do not think it hit anything vital. We need to stop the bleeding and clean the wound before infection sets in." "The doctor will be here soon," Garrett said. "We cannot wait." Mary looked up at him, and Garrett saw the strength in her eyes, the same strength that had gotten her through widowhood and poverty and upheaval. "I helped the midwife in St. Louis deliver babies and tend the sick. I know what to do, but I need your help." Garrett nodded. "Tell me what you need." For the next hour, Mary worked over Daniel with calm efficiency, cleaning the wound, packing it with clean cloth, and stitching the torn flesh with steady hands while Garrett held the young man down and Daniel bit on a leather strap to keep from screaming. By the time the doctor arrived, the worst was over. He examined Mary's work and pronounced it excellent, leaving laudanum for the pain and instructions for care. "He will be fine, thanks to you," the doctor told Mary. "You have some skill with medicine." "My mother was a nurse during the war," Mary replied, washing blood from her hands. "She taught me what she knew." Daniel was moved to a bed in one of the downstairs rooms, and Mary tended him over the following days as he recovered. Garrett, meanwhile, assembled his men and made it clear that the rustling would stop. They set up watches, patrolled in pairs, and made their presence known. The theft ceased, though whether because the rustlers had moved on or because they knew the ranch was now vigilant, Garrett could not say. As Daniel healed, he talked more with Mary during her visits to change his bandages and bring him food. Garrett tried not to feel jealous of the easy conversation between them, tried not to notice how Daniel seemed to look forward to Mary's care. But the truth was, he did notice, and it ate at him. One evening, as Garrett checked on Daniel before bed, the young man spoke up. "Boss, I want you to know I appreciate everything you and Mary have done for me. She is a remarkable woman." "She is," Garrett agreed carefully. Daniel smiled slightly. "You do not need to worry. I can see how things stand between you two, even if you both seem determined to ignore it. I'm not fool enough to step in the middle of that." Garrett felt his face heat. "I do not know what you mean." "With respect, sir, yes you do." Daniel shifted in the bed, wincing slightly. "You look at her the way a man looks at the woman he loves. And she looks at you the same way, though she is fighting it harder than you are. Whatever you are waiting for, do not wait too long. Life is short and second chances are rare." Garrett left the room without responding, but Daniel's words haunted him. Was it true? Did Mary feel the same pull he did? And if so, what was he supposed to do about it? She was his brother's widow. There were proprieties to consider, a mourning period to respect. But Daniel was right about one thing. Life was short. Thomas's death had proven that. Christmas came, and Mary insisted on celebrating properly for Sarah's sake. She baked pies and cookies, hung evergreen boughs around the house, and even convinced Garrett to cut down a small tree which they decorated with strings of popcorn and paper ornaments Sarah made. The men were invited to the house for Christmas dinner, and they came bearing small gifts for Sarah that made the little girl squeal with delight. Daniel, now recovered enough to walk with a sling, presented her with a wooden horse he had carved during his convalescence. Watching Sarah's joy, seeing his house filled with warmth and laughter and life, Garrett felt something crack open in his chest. This was what he wanted. Not just for a season, but forever. This family, this feeling, this woman who had brought light into his carefully controlled world. After the men had returned to the bunkhouse and Sarah had finally been put to bed, exhausted from excitement, Garrett found Mary cleaning up in the kitchen. He picked up a towel and began drying the dishes she washed, working in comfortable silence. "Thank you for today," he said finally. "It meant a lot to Sarah, and to me." "I enjoyed it," Mary said. "It felt good to celebrate again, to remember that there is still joy in the world." "Mary," Garrett began, then stopped, unsure how to continue. She turned to look at him, her hand still in the dishwater. "Yes." "How long does a woman mourn her husband? What is the proper time?" Mary's eyes widened slightly, and color bloomed in her cheeks. "Traditionally, a year," she said quietly. "Though some mourn longer. Why do you ask?" "It has been 4 months," Garrett said, his heart pounding. "I know it is not enough time. I know there are rules about these things. But I need you to know that when the proper time has passed, when you are ready, I would like to court you, with honorable intentions." Mary drew in a sharp breath, her eyes glistening suddenly. "Garrett, I do not know what to say." "You do not need to say anything now," he assured her quickly. "I am not asking for an answer. I just wanted you to know my feelings, to know that you are not alone here, that I care for you, deeply." She was silent for a long moment, tears sliding down her cheeks. Then she said, voice trembling, "I loved Thomas. I did. He was a good man, and I mourned him sincerely, I know that. But the truth is," Mary continued, "I have felt my heart turning toward you for weeks now. And it has made me feel terribly guilty. What kind of woman falls for her husband's brother only months after being widowed?" Garrett set down his towel and gently took her wet hands in his. "The kind of woman who is alive and human and deserves happiness. Thomas would not want you to mourn forever. He would want you to live, to find joy again." "How can you be sure?" "Because he was my brother, and I knew his heart. And because if I were in his place, if I had died and left you alone, I would want you cared for by someone who would cherish you the way you deserve." Mary sobbed once, then leaned forward until her forehead rested against Garrett's chest. He wrapped his arms around her, holding her carefully, feeling her shake with emotion. They stood that way for a long time, not speaking, just existing together in a moment of profound understanding. Finally, Mary pulled back, wiping her eyes. "I need time," she said. "Not because I do not care for you, but because I need to do this properly. For me and for Sarah and for Thomas's memory." "Take all the time you need," Garrett said. "I am not going anywhere." The winter months passed with a new awareness between them. They were careful around each other, maintaining propriety, but there was a warmth in their interactions that had not been there before. Garrett found excuses to be near her, and Mary seemed to do the same. They had long conversations in the evening after Sarah went to bed, talking about everything from philosophy to farming, from books to dreams for the future. Garrett learned that Mary was far more educated than he had realized, that she had attended a female seminary before her family's financial troubles had forced her into seamstress work. She spoke French and had read extensively, and her observations about the world were sharp and insightful. In turn, he told her about his dreams for the ranch, about the improvements he wanted to make, the legacy he hoped to build. He confessed his loneliness over the years, how he had poured everything into the land because he had nothing else to pour it into. "You could have married," Mary pointed out one evening as they sat by the fire. "Surely there were women in town who would have been interested." "Perhaps," Garrett acknowledged, "but none who interested me. I did not want a wife just for the sake of having one. I wanted someone I could talk to, someone who understood me. I had begun to think that person did not exist." "And now?" Mary asked softly. "Now I know she does," Garrett replied, meeting her eyes. Sarah, oblivious to the adult undercurrents, continued to thrive. She had grown visibly healthier since arriving at the ranch. The fresh air and good food and freedom to run filling out her thin frame and bringing color to her cheeks. She adored Garrett, following him around whenever Mary allowed it, and he found himself teaching her to ride, to recognize cattle brands, to understand the rhythms of ranch life. She was bright and eager to learn, and he discovered a paternal instinct in himself he had not known existed. One afternoon in late February, Garrett was working in the barn when he heard shouting from the yard. He ran outside to find two of his hands struggling with a man he did not recognize, a rough-looking character with mean eyes and the smell of whiskey on his breath. "What is going on here?" Garrett demanded. "Found him trying to sneak into the house," Daniel said, holding one of the man's arms. "Caught him at the back door." Cold fury swept through Garrett. Mary and Sarah were in that house. "Who are you and what do you want?" The man spat on the ground. "Name is Pike." "I am looking for work. We are not hiring, and men looking for work come to the front door and ask properly. They do not sneak around back." Pike sneered. "I heard there was a widow living here, thought she might be friendlier than the boss." Garrett hit him. It was not a decision so much as an instinct, his fist connecting with Pike's jaw and sending the man sprawling in the dirt. "Get him off my land," Garrett said coldly, "and make sure he understands that if I ever see him here again, I will not be so gentle." The hands dragged Pike to his horse and sent him off with a few extra kicks for good measure. Garrett stood in the yard, his heart pounding, his knuckles split and bleeding. He had been right to be cautious about hiring. The world was full of men like Pike, men who saw women as prey, who had no respect or decency. Mary appeared on the porch, having heard the commotion. "What happened?" "Nothing you need to worry about," Garrett assured her, but she came down the steps and took his hand, examining his injured knuckles with a frown. "You are hurt. It is nothing. Come inside. Let me clean this." She led him into the kitchen and made him sit while she fetched water and bandages. As she carefully cleaned the blood from his hand, she said quietly, "Sarah saw some of it through the window. She was frightened. I am sorry. Do not be. You were protecting us. She understands that, and so do I." Mary finished wrapping his hand and looked up at him. "I feel safe with you, Garrett. No matter what happens, I always feel safe." It was late March when Mary came to him one evening after Sarah was asleep. She found him on the porch, looking out at the star-filled sky, and she sat down beside him without a word. They sat in silence for a few minutes before she spoke. "It has been 7 months," she said quietly. Garrett's heart began to race. "Yes. I know the proper time is a year, but I have been thinking about what you said, about life being short and Thomas wanting me to be happy." She turned to look at him. "I am ready, Garrett. If your offer still stands, I would like to be courted properly." Joy surged through him, bright and fierce. "My offer stands. It will always stand." Mary smiled, and in the moonlight she looked younger, less burdened. "Then we should probably establish some rules for propriety." "What kind of rules?" "Well, we should inform Sarah of our intentions. She should understand what is happening and why. And perhaps we should let people in town know as well, so there is no gossip or scandal." "Agreed." "What else?" "We should take our time, court properly. No rushing into marriage just because it is convenient or expected." "I have no intention of rushing," Garrett said. "I want to do this right." "I want you to be absolutely certain this is what you want." "I am certain," Mary said softly. "I think I have been certain for a while now. I was just too afraid to admit it." Garrett reached out and took her hand, their fingers intertwining. It was the first truly romantic touch between them, and it sent electricity up his arm. "I care for you so much," he said, his voice rough with emotion. "You have changed everything for me, you and Sarah both." "You have changed everything for us too," Mary whispered. "You gave us a home and a future when we had nothing. How could I not fall in love with you? The words hung in the air, precious and profound. Say that again, Garrett requested. I love you, Mary said, clearer this time. I love your kindness and your strength. I love how you are with Sarah, how gentle you can be despite your rough exterior. I love your dedication to this land and the way you care for the people who depend on you. I love you, Garrett McKenna. Garrett brought her hand to his lips and kissed it gently. I love you too, Mary. I think I started falling the day you offered to help me interview ranch hands, when you showed me you were not just strong but brave and practical and clever. Everything I have learned about you since has only made me love you more. They sat together on the porch until late into the night, talking and planning and simply enjoying being able to express what had been building between them for months. When they finally parted to go to their separate rooms, Garrett felt lighter than he had in years. The next morning, they sat Sarah down and explained that Uncle Garrett and Mama cared for each other very much, and that if Sarah was comfortable with it, they would like to court with the intention of eventually becoming a family officially. Sarah, who at 6 was perceptive beyond her years, simply smiled and said, "Does that mean Uncle Garrett will be my papa?" "If you would like that," Garrett said, his throat tight with emotion. Sarah threw her arms around his neck. "I would like that very much. I miss my old papa, but I love you too." "You can love us both," Mary assured her daughter, wiping tears from her own eyes. "Your Papa Thomas would be happy knowing you are loved and cared for." Over the following weeks, Garrett courted Mary properly. He brought her wildflowers from the prairie. He took her for buggy rides into town, where they had dinner at the hotel restaurant and walked through the general store. He sat with her in the evening and read poetry aloud, which she found charmingly incongruous coming from his rough cowboy exterior. He asked her opinions on ranch decisions, treated her as a partner rather than a dependent, and made sure she knew she was valued for more than just her domestic skills. Mary, in turn, opened up in ways she had not before. She laughed more easily, sang while she worked, and allowed herself to show affection openly. She would touch Garrett's arm when passing him, smile at him across the room, and sit close to him in the evenings. They were careful to maintain propriety, never alone together behind closed doors, never doing anything that would invite scandal. But their affection was clear to everyone on the ranch, and the men seemed genuinely happy for them. "About time," Charlie said gruffly one day when Garrett mentioned his intentions. "We have all been watching you two dance around each other for months. Mary is good for you, boss, and you are good for her." In May, exactly 9 months after Mary had arrived in Texas, Garrett proposed formally. He arranged for one of the ranch wives to watch Sarah for the evening, then took Mary on a picnic to a spot overlooking the ranch, where the sunset painted the sky in shades of gold and crimson. "This is beautiful," Mary said, looking out over the land that had become her home. "I wanted to show you something," Garrett said, pulling a small box from his pocket. "This was my mother's ring. She gave it to me before she died and told me to give it to the woman I wanted to spend my life with." Mary's eyes widened as he opened the box to reveal a simple gold band with a small but lovely sapphire. "Garrett," she breathed. He took her hand, his own trembling slightly with nerves. "Mary McKenna, you have brought joy and purpose and love into my life. You have made my house a home and shown me what it means to be part of a family. I want to spend the rest of my life making you happy, protecting you and Sarah, building a future together. Will you marry me?" Tears streamed down Mary's face, but she was smiling. "Yes," she said. "Yes, 1,000 times yes. I would be honored to be your wife." Garrett slipped the ring onto her finger and then, finally, he kissed her. It was gentle and sweet and full of promise, the first kiss between them, and Mary's hand came up to rest against his cheek as she kissed him back. When they finally pulled apart, both were breathless. "I have wanted to do that for so long," Garrett admitted. "So have I," Mary laughed, wiping her eyes. "When shall we marry?" "As soon as you wish." "Tomorrow, if you want," Mary smiled. "Perhaps a little longer than that. I would like to make a proper dress, and we should plan a small celebration, but not too long. I do not want to wait forever." They decided on late June, which gave them 6 weeks to prepare. Mary enlisted the help of the ranch wives to sew a dress, and Garrett arranged for a preacher to come from town. They would marry at the ranch, with the hands and a few neighbors as witnesses, then have a dinner celebration afterward. The weeks flew by in a flurry of preparation. The house was cleaned until it sparkled. Mary's dress took shape, a lovely creation in cream-colored silk that one of the neighbor women had been saving for years. Sarah was fitted for a new dress as well and given the important task of carrying flowers. Garrett had the yard cleaned up, built a small arbor for them to stand under during the ceremony, and arranged for a photographer to come from Abilene to take pictures. As the wedding day approached, Garrett found himself increasingly nervous. Not about marrying Mary, he had never been more certain of anything but about being a good husband, a good father to Sarah, worthy of the trust they were placing in him. The night before the wedding, Daniel found him sitting on the porch, staring into the darkness. "Getting cold feet, boss?" "No. Just thinking." "About what?" "About how to be what they need me to be." Daniel sat down on the porch rail. "You already are. You have been for months. Being a good husband and father is not about being perfect. It is about showing up, caring, being present, and you do all those things naturally." "What if I fail them?" "You will not. But even if you stumble, they will forgive you. That is what family does." Daniel smiled. "You saved my life, boss, you and Mary both, and in the time I have been here, I have seen how you treat people, how you care for this place and everyone on it. Those two are lucky to have you, but you are lucky to have them too. That is how it should be." The next morning dawned clear and beautiful, the Texas sky a brilliant blue unmarred by clouds. Garrett dressed in his best suit, his hands shaking slightly as he tied his tie. Charlie served as his best man, and the old cowboy looked almost emotional as they walked out to the arbor where the preacher waited. The ranch hands and neighbors gathered in the yard, everyone dressed in their Sunday best. And then Mary appeared, walking from the house with Sarah at her side, and Garrett felt his breath catch. She was beautiful, the sunlight catching in her dark hair, her face radiant with happiness. Sarah scattered wildflower petals before her mother, taking her role very seriously. When Mary reached the arbor, she handed her bouquet to Sarah and took Garrett's hands. The preacher began the ceremony, but Garrett barely heard the words. He was lost in Mary's eyes, seeing his entire future reflected there. "Do you, Garrett Daniel McKenna, take this woman to be your lawfully wedded wife, to have and to hold from this day forward, for better or for worse, for richer or for poorer, in sickness and in health, until death do you part?" "I do," Garrett said, his voice strong and sure. "And do you, Mary Elizabeth McKenna, take this man to be your lawfully wedded husband, to have and to hold from this day forward, for better or for worse, for richer or for poorer, in sickness and in health, until death do you part?" "I do," Mary said, tears streaming down her smiling face. "Then by the power vested in me, I now pronounce you husband and wife. You may kiss your bride." Garrett cupped Mary's face in his hands and kissed her tenderly, aware of their audience but not caring. This was his wife, his love, his future. When they pulled apart, the gathered crowd cheered, and Sarah threw herself at them both, hugging their legs and laughing with pure joy. The celebration that followed was lively and heartfelt. Tables had been set up in the yard laden with food that Mary and the neighbor women had prepared. There was music and dancing, and Garrett waltzed with Mary beneath the open sky while everyone watched and applauded. He danced with Sarah too, lifting her up so her feet rested on his boots as they spun around, her delighted laughter the best sound he had ever heard. As the sun began to set and the guests started to depart, Garrett and Mary stood together watching Sarah play with the other children. "Happy?" Garrett asked, his arm around Mary's waist. "Happier than I ever thought I could be again," Mary said, leaning into him. "Thank you for being patient with me, for giving me time to heal and to find my way here." "Thank you for taking a chance on me," Garrett replied, "for seeing past the rough exterior to whatever it is you found worth loving." "I found everything worth loving," Mary said softly. She turned in his arms to face him. "I know this started in tragedy with loss and grief, but somehow that has led us here to something beautiful and right. I believe Thomas would be happy for us." "So do I," Garrett agreed. He kissed her forehead gently. "I promise you, Mary, I will spend every day trying to be worthy of you and Sarah. I will protect you, cherish you, and love you for the rest of my life." "I know you will," Mary said. "That is why I married you." That night, after the guests had gone and Sarah had been tucked into bed with promises that nothing would change except they would all be even happier, Garrett and Mary finally retired to the room they would now share. It was awkward at first, both of them shy despite their married status, but their love overcame their nervousness. They came together with tenderness and passion, and afterward, lying in each other's arms, both felt that they had truly come home. The summer months passed in a haze of happiness. Mary settled fully into her role as ranch wife, but she was far more than that. She became Garrett's true partner, involved in all aspects of running the ranch. She kept the books because her math was better than his, helped make decisions about buying and selling cattle, and even had opinions on which pastures should be rotated when. The ranch hands respected her, and she treated them with fairness and kindness. Sarah flourished in the secure environment of a complete family. She called Garrett Papa now without hesitation, and he loved her as fiercely as if she were his biological child. He taught her to ride properly, and by August, she could sit a horse as well as any 8-year-old boy. She helped Mary in the garden, learned to churn butter and feed chickens, and attended the small school that had opened in town 3 days a week. In September, Mary discovered she was pregnant. She told Garrett one evening after Sarah had gone to bed, taking his hand and placing it on her still flat stomach with tears of joy in her eyes. Garrett was overcome, pulling her into his arms and holding her tight, overcome with gratitude and wonder. "We are having a baby," he kept repeating as if he could not quite believe it. "We are," Mary confirmed, laughing through her tears. "Are you happy?" "Happy does not begin to cover it," Garrett said. He pulled back to look at her face. "You have given me everything, Mary. A home, a family, a purpose beyond just surviving, and now a child of our own. I do not know what I did to deserve this, but I thank God for it every day." Sarah was thrilled when they told her she would be a big sister. She immediately began planning all the things she would teach the baby, from riding horses to collecting eggs. Mary's pregnancy progressed smoothly through the fall and winter. Garrett was protective to the point of being comical, barely letting her lift anything heavier than a teacup. But Mary tolerated his hovering with patient amusement. In early March of 1884, after a labor that lasted through the night and into the next afternoon, Mary delivered a healthy baby boy. Garrett was present for the birth, holding Mary's hand and wiping her forehead, and when the midwife finally placed the squalling infant in his arms, he wept openly. "He is perfect," Garrett said, staring down at his son's red, wrinkled face with absolute wonder. "What shall we name him?" Mary asked tiredly from the bed, her face pale but glowing. Garrett had thought about this. "If you are agreeable, I would like to name him Thomas Garrett McKenna, after your first husband and my brother, so his memory lives on." Fresh tears spilled down Mary's cheeks. "That is perfect," she whispered. "Thomas would have loved that, and this way Sarah will always have her father's name in the family." They called him Tommy, and he was doted on from his first breath. Sarah was a devoted big sister, always wanting to hold him or sing to him or show him things even though he was far too young to understand. The ranch hands took turns carving toys for him. Even the usually gruff Charlie had a soft spot for the baby, often found making silly faces to coax out a smile. Garrett discovered that fatherhood suited him. He loved the weight of his son in his arms, the way Tommy's tiny hand would grip his finger, the baby's smell and soft sounds. He loved watching Mary nurse their child, the peaceful intimacy of it. And he loved seeing Sarah's pride in her baby brother, the way she had grown into her role in their family. The ranch continued to prosper. Word had spread that Garrett treated his workers fairly and paid well, and he had his pick of good men when positions needed filling. The hiring policy had never changed. Mary still met every applicant, and her approval was required before anyone was brought on. It had become known throughout the region, actually earning the ranch respect rather than mockery. People understood that Garrett McKenna valued his family's safety above all else, and there was honor in that. Tommy grew from infant to toddler, a sturdy boy with his father's green eyes and his mother's dark hair. He learned to walk holding onto Sarah's hands, took his first steps toward Garrett, and said "Mama" as his first word, much to Mary's delight. Sarah taught him to pet the horses gently, to find eggs in the hen house, and to splash in the creek on hot summer days. When Tommy was 2, Mary became pregnant again. This time she carried with more difficulty, plagued by sickness and exhaustion. Garrett hired a woman from town to help with the housework, so Mary could rest, and he took over more of Sarah's care, strengthening the already strong bond between them. Their second son, James, was born in the winter of 1886, a quiet baby where Tommy had been fussy, content to observe the world with solemn dark eyes. With 2 young children and Sarah now 10 years old and growing more independent, the house was full of life and noise and love. Years passed in the rhythm of ranch life. Seasons changed, cattle were bought and sold, buildings were repaired or expanded. Sarah grew into a lovely young woman, smart and capable, eventually going off to a female college in Austin with Garrett's blessing and financial support. Tommy and James grew strong and healthy, learning to work the ranch alongside their father, absorbing his knowledge and work ethic. Through it all, Garrett and Mary's love only deepened. They still found time for each other, even amidst the chaos of raising children and running a ranch. They took rides together in the evening after the boys were in bed. They danced in the kitchen when no one was watching. They talked for hours about everything and nothing, never running out of things to say. "You ever regret it?" Mary asked one evening when they were in their 40s, sitting on the porch and watching the sunset like they had so many times before. "Taking us in, changing your whole life." Garrett turned to look at his wife, still beautiful to him despite the silver threading through her hair and the lines time had etched around her eyes. "Never," he said firmly. "You and Sarah arriving was the best thing that ever happened to me. Everything good in my life started the day you stepped off that train. We were so lost," Mary remembered, "so scared. And you were this stern, serious man who barely smiled. I was terrified of being a burden. You were never a burden, you were a blessing." Garrett took her hand, their fingers intertwining automatically after so many years together. Do you remember when we started interviewing ranch hands together? Of course, I thought you were being overprotective. I was, I still am, Garrett smiled. But you understood why. You have always understood me, Mary. And you have always protected me, kept me safe, made me feel cherished. That is no small thing. Mary leaned her head on his shoulder. I love Thomas, and I am grateful for Sarah and the years I had with him. But what we have, Garrett, what we built together, it is more than I ever dreamed possible. Sarah returned from college with a degree and promptly fell in love with a young teacher in town, a gentle man named Robert who reminded Garrett very much of Thomas. They married in 1892 in a ceremony even larger than Garrett and Mary's had been, and Sarah glowed with happiness as she exchanged vows. Garrett walked her down the aisle with tears in his eyes, remembering the scared little 5-year-old who had arrived all those years ago. You have been a wonderful father to me, Sarah told him before the ceremony. I know you are not my blood papa, but you are my papa in every way that matters. Thank you for loving me and Mama, for giving us a home and a family. Thank you for letting me, Garrett replied, hugging her tight. You made me a father, Sarah. That is a gift I can never repay. Tommy and James took over more of the ranch work as Garrett aged, both proving to be capable and hardworking. They had learned well from their father, treating workers fairly, making smart decisions, and always putting family first. When Tommy married at 25, he brought his wife to live on the ranch, and Garrett built them a small house on the property. James eventually did the same, and the ranch became a true family compound. Grandchildren arrived, filling the main house with noise and laughter again. Mary was a doting grandmother, always ready with cookies and stories. Garrett taught his grandchildren to ride just as he had taught his children, patient and encouraging. He told them stories of the old days, of building the ranch from nothing, of meeting their grandmother and falling in love. On a warm spring evening in 1902, Garrett and Mary celebrated their 20th wedding anniversary. The entire family gathered for a party, 3 generations sitting down to dinner together. Sarah had come from town with her husband and 3 children. Tommy and James were there with their wives and combined 5 children. The house overflowed with family, and Garrett looked around the table with profound contentment. After dinner, as the sun set and the children played in the yard, Garrett and Mary took their usual evening walk around the ranch. They moved slower now, both in their 60s, but they still enjoyed the ritual. 20 years, Mary said, shaking her head. It seems impossible. It feels like yesterday and a lifetime ago all at once. Best 20 years of my life, Garrett said. Actually, the best 21 years. It has been 21 since you arrived in Abilene with Sarah. We were so lost, Mary remembered. I had no idea what to expect, what kind of man you would be. And now I know you are the best man I have ever known, strong and gentle, fierce and kind. You gave me safety when I needed it most, and then you gave me love. You gave Sarah a father and a home. You gave me Tommy and James and this beautiful life. How can I ever thank you for all of that? Garrett stopped walking and turned to face her, taking both her hands in his. You thank me every day just by being here, by choosing me, by building this life with me. You made me whole, Mary. I was just existing before you came. You taught me how to truly live. They kissed, soft and sweet, a kiss of deep companionship and enduring love. When they pulled apart, Mary was smiling. Promise me something, she said. Anything. Promise me we will grow old together, that we will sit on that porch watching sunsets for many more years, that we will see our grandchildren grow and maybe even meet great-grandchildren. I promise, Garrett said solemnly. God willing, we will have many more years together, and even when our time comes, even beyond this life, I will find you again. That is how much I love you. tears shone in Mary's eyes. "I love you too, Garrett McKenna, today, tomorrow, and forever." They walked back to the house hand in hand, their silhouettes framed against the setting sun. Behind them, the ranch spread out in all its beauty, the land Garrett had built and Mary had helped sustain, the legacy they would pass to their children and grandchildren. And inside the house, their family waited, the greatest treasure of all, born from tragedy and grief, but transformed into something beautiful and lasting. Sarah stood on the porch watching her parents approach, and she smiled. She thought of her father Thomas sometimes, but the memories were distant and dreamlike. Garrett was her papa, the man who had raised her, protected her, loved her. She thought of how different her life might have been if that telegram had never arrived, if Garrett had not taken them in, if he had not cared enough to make them part of his world. She thought of all those ranch hands he had refused to hire over the years without her mother's approval, the lengths he had gone to ensure their safety. It had seemed extreme at first, perhaps even unnecessary. But now, looking at the life they had built, the family that had grown from those careful choices, Sarah understood. Her father had known something she was only now learning as a parent herself, that protecting the people you love was not weakness or overreaction. It was strength. It was love in action. Inside the house, Tommy was telling his children about how their grandfather had built the ranch with his bare hands, how he had met their grandmother and made her feel safe when she had nowhere else to turn. James added details about the time their father had defended their mother from a man who had come around looking for trouble, how he had made it clear that Mary and Sarah were under his protection and always would be. The grandchildren listened with wide eyes, absorbing family history, learning the values that had sustained the McKenna family through 2 decades and would continue to sustain them for generations to come. They learned that love meant protection, that family meant sacrifice. That home was not just a place, but a feeling of safety and belonging. As night fell and the stars emerged in the vast Texas sky, the family lingered together, reluctant to let the celebration end. They told stories and laughed and simply enjoyed being together. And at the center of it all were Garrett and Mary, the foundation upon which everything else had been built. Years continued to pass. Garrett and Mary kept their promise, growing old together on the ranch they both loved. They watched their grandchildren grow into adults, saw great-grandchildren born, and continued to be the heart of the family. The ranch remained prosperous, passed eventually to Tommy and James, who ran it according to the principles their father had taught them. When Garrett finally passed away in 1915 at the age of 74, he died peacefully in his sleep with Mary holding his hand. The entire county came to his funeral, testament to the respect he had earned over a lifetime of honest dealing and fair treatment. He was buried on a hill overlooking the ranch, and Mary visited his grave every day, talking to him about the family, the land, the life they had shared. She lived another 5 years without him, surrounded by children and grandchildren and great-grandchildren who loved her dearly. She never stopped missing Garrett, but she took comfort in the legacy they had built together, the family that would continue long after they were both gone. On a quiet evening in June 1920, Mary passed away in the house Garrett had built, in the room they had shared for so many years. She was 83 years old, and her last words were, "I am coming, my love." She was buried beside Garrett on the hill, and at her funeral, Sarah spoke about her mother and stepfather's love story. She told of arriving in Texas as a frightened 5-year-old, of Garrett's quiet kindness, of how he and her mother had fallen in love despite their grief. She spoke of the way he had protected them, how he had refused to hire ranch hands without Mary's approval, how her safety had always been his first priority. "That was who my father was," Sarah said, tears streaming down her weathered face. "A man who understood that true strength lies in protecting those who depend on you. A man who loved so deeply that he built his entire life around keeping that love safe. My mother found in him not just a refuge but a partner, a soulmate, a great love. And together, they built this." She gestured to the assembled crowd, 4 generations of family and friends. "This is their legacy. Not just the land or the ranch, but all of us. Every person here whose life was touched by their love." The ranch continued to thrive under the stewardship of Tommy and James, and eventually their children. The main house was preserved much as Garrett and Mary had left it, becoming a touchstone for family gatherings and celebrations. And on the porch where Garrett and Mary had spent so many evenings watching the sunset, their descendants continued the tradition, sitting together and talking and simply being present with each other. The story of how Garrett refused to hire ranch hands until Mary approved each one became family legend, told and retold to each new generation. It became a teaching moment about respect and protection, about the importance of making loved ones feel safe. It reminded them that love was not just words or feelings but actions, choices made every single day to put others first. And high on the hill overlooking the ranch, 2 graves stood side by side beneath a large oak tree. The headstones were simple, bearing names and dates and a single inscription that captured the essence of their story. Together in life, together in eternity, their love endures. Visitors to the ranch, even many years later, would sometimes climb the hill to see those graves and hear the story of Garrett and Mary McKenna. They would learn about a cowboy who had built an empire with his own hands, who had taken in his brother's widow and child and given them a home. They would hear about the unusual hiring practice, about how he had valued his family's safety above profit or convenience. And they would learn about a love that had overcome grief and doubt to become something beautiful and lasting. The story resonated because it spoke to something fundamental in the human heart, the desire to be protected and cherished, to know that someone considers your well-being more important than anything else. Garrett had given that to Mary, and in return, she had given him purpose and family, and a reason to build something greater than himself. Their love story was not one of grand gestures or dramatic rescues, though it had elements of both. It was instead a story of quiet devotion, of daily choices to honor and protect, of 2 people who had found in each other exactly what they needed. It was a story of the Wild West, but more than that, it was a story of home and heart and the enduring power of love. And as the sun set over the Texas prairie, painting the sky in shades of gold and crimson just as it had done for centuries, the McKenna Ranch stood as a testament to what 2 people could build when they chose to build it together. The land endured, the family flourished, and the love that had started it all remained, woven into every fence post and foundation stone, remembered in every story told around the dinner table, alive in the hearts of all who came after. This was the legacy of Garrett and Mary McKenna, a rancher who had refused to hire hands without his wife's approval, and a widow who had found safety and love in the most unexpected place. It was a story worth remembering, worth telling, worth living. And on the ranch they had built together, surrounded by the family they had created, their memory lived on, as enduring as the land itself.